Well, today we do start a new sermon series on the book of Job. And Job is one of those books that a lot of us feel like we know a little bit about, but a lot of us have not actually read. And we're not going to read all of it in this sermon series either, because it goes on for 42 chapters. And that'd get a little monotonous, I think. But we are going to hit some of the high points. We're going to start with the very first chapter today. And one thing I want to deal with before we actually get into the story is that you will hear sometimes people discuss whether the story of Job is something that actually happened to a real person, or whether Job was an actual person who lived and had to deal with all this, or whether this was just a story that's designed to teach us about God. And my opinion on that is that it really does not matter. You can think what you want to think about it, because whether Job was a real person or not is really not the issue. Because, and you've heard me say this before, when we read these things in the Bible, the question we need to ask is, why was this included in the Bible? What am I supposed to learn from this? Why did the people who were putting together the Bible, who were inspired, of course, by God, why did those people decide that this story was one that needed to be included? What do we learn from it? And that's what I want you to focus on as we go through all this sermon series and think about the story of Job. What is it that we're supposed to learn from Job's story? Well, in this first chapter, we meet Job, and Job is a righteous man. He is described as blameless and upright. We're told that he feared God, that he shunned evil. And then we learn about a conversation between God and Satan concerning Job. And we'll come back to that conversation, but right now what I want to do is focus on this story from Job's perspective. Here's Job, again, this blameless, righteous, upright man, a man who appears to be about as good a human being as it is possible for anybody to be. And God has blessed him. God's blessed him with great wealth. He has a large number of sheep and camel and oxen and donkeys. He has lots of servants. And God's also blessed him with a large family, 7 sons and 3 daughters. But Job did not let any of this go to his head. Again, he continued to fear God and to shun evil. And so Job's sitting at home one day, and a messenger comes up to him, tells him all of his oxen and donkeys have been stolen. And no sooner does he hear that, another messenger comes up and tells him all his sheep and all of his servants are dead. No sooner does he hear that than another messenger comes up and tells him all his camels have been stolen too. And no sooner does he hear that than yet another messenger comes up, tells him all of his children have been killed in an accident. And you think you've had a bad day sometimes. Think about this. You know, in a way, it almost sounds comical when they describe it this way. Just one thing and another and another. You know, before one messenger stops speaking, another one comes up. But think about it. Think about if you were Job. You've been on top of the world. You had everything. Now you've lost it all. All your wealth is gone. All your children are gone. And I know some of you have lost children, and you know what a terrible, painful thing that is. Job lost 10 of them at once. And you may have thought that where we left the Bible reading was kind of an odd way to leave it, but we're going to talk next week about how Job responded to all this. For today, I want you to think about how you would respond. How would you feel? I mean, you'd feel awful, obviously, but what would you feel about God if this happened? How would you react to God if everything you had, including all of your children, was taken from you just in one fell swoop? Well, there are all kinds of ways we might react. We might react with anger, might react with questions, might react ultimately with acceptance, might do all those things and more at various times as we were dealing with this. But one thing we would probably do is ask the question, why? Why did all this happen? And that's the question we ask all the time when we hear about something terrible, right? When there's an accident, when something bad happens, especially if it's something bad that happened that was out of our control, we look to God and ask, why? Why, God? Why did this happen? And even if we don't blame God for it, even if we don't think God caused it to happen, We still know, because God is all powerful, that God could have kept it from happening had God chosen to do that. And for whatever reason, God did not choose to do that. God did not choose to keep it from happening. God allowed it to happen. And we want to know why. Eventually, Job wanted to know why too. And again, we'll talk about that later in this sermon series. But in this case, we as the readers, we know why. In the context of Job's story, we're told that this was the work of Satan. Satan in this story basically gives God a challenge. God tells Satan what a wonderful person Job is, what a wonderful servant of God Job is. Satan says, well, sure he is. Look at what you've done for him. You've made his life easy. You've given him everything he could possibly want. You take all that stuff away from you and he'll turn on you in no time. And God takes the challenge. God says to Satan, okay, take it all away from him if you want to. Do anything you want to do. You cannot harm him physically, but you can do anything else to Job that you want to do. We'll see what Job does. In all of those 42 chapters of the book of Job, it apparently never occurs to Job or to any of his friends, who we'll talk about later too, never occurs to any of them that this might be the reason why this had happened. Never occurs to him that this stuff might be because God and Satan were testing him. He cannot figure out why it did happen, neither can his friends. He and his friends come up with all kinds of ideas what might be going on. But apparently never did Job or any of his friends consider that maybe this was some kind of test that God and Satan were doing to prove something. Now maybe you think this was a pretty hard way for Job to be dealt with, or for his family too, for that matter, to be used in this way. It does kind of seem like that when we think about it. But again, the question is, what are we supposed to learn from it? We've all had times when bad things have happened, either to us or to people close to us. Sometimes those things happen to us through no fault of our own, just as Job was not at fault for the things that happened to him. When that happens, we don't understand what's going on. But here's the thing. Through all of this stuff that happened, God did not abandon Job. It may have felt to Job like God had abandoned him, but God did not. God was aware of everything that happened to Job. And yes, God did allow it to happen. But here's what Job did not realize. God had a reason for allowing it to happen. God was not punishing Job by allowing this stuff to happen. God was planning to use all of this for God's glory. And ultimately, God was going to use it for Job's glory as well. Now, Job had no clue about that at the time. But God was planning to use all of these things that happened to Job for Job's glory and for God's glory. God did not make them happen. God did not require Satan to do what Satan did. But God knew that no matter what Satan did, God would be able to use it for God's glory and for Job's. So what can we learn from this? We can learn that sometimes, no matter how good or upright or blameless a life we might try to lead, bad things still happen. God never promised to keep bad things from happening to us. We can learn that when those bad things do happen to us, it's not God punishing us, and it's not God abandoning us. God sees what's happened. God knows what's happened. And yes, God has allowed it to happen. But God has a reason for allowing these things to happen. We may not realize it. We may have no idea what the reason is. And it could be that no matter how hard we try to look for a reason, the reason will never even occur to us, any more than it did to Job. But there still is a reason. God never does anything for no reason. And God never allows anything for no reason. Sometimes the stuff that's happening seems like it's pretty hard on us. But God is still going to use it. God is going to use it for God's glory. And ultimately, God is going to use it for our glory too. We may have no clue about that at the time. But God is going to use the bad stuff that happens to us for our own glory, as well as for God's glory. Now, I'm also confident that as I've been saying all this stuff about bad things happening, some of you have a specific thing in mind, or maybe more than one thing. Something that's happened to you, something that's happened to somebody close to you. I can think of some specific things too. And some of you are thinking, what reason could God possibly have had for allowing that to happen? How could God possibly use that for God's glory? And how in the world could God ever use it for my glory? I don't have the answer for you. And in fact, you may never know the answer, at least while you're on earth. I may never know the answer either. Job did not find out the answer until the 42nd chapter of the book, and even then he did not find out the whole answer. He never knew anything about the challenge between God and Satan. He did not understand how this had been used for God's glory as well as his. He just knew that it had been. And that's about all I can tell you. Whatever the thing is that you have in mind, I don't think God probably caused it any more than God forced Satan to treat Job the way he did. But God did allow it to happen. And somehow, in some way, God is going to use it for God's glory and for your glory. And if you don't believe that right now, that's okay. Come back next week when we talk about Job's response to all of this stuff that happened. But for now, just hold on to that possibility. Hold that possibility open. Whatever the bad thing is that you're thinking about, at least consider the possibility that God might be going to use it for God's glory and for your glory. Even if you cannot see how, just give God the benefit of the doubt, at least for now. Because when we do that, when we give God that benefit of the doubt, then we're at the beginning of faith. And that's the time when we're at the beginning of faith that God often chooses to show us some incredible things. Amen.